Hello everyone. I wanted to provide you with Creswell's model. John Creswell has written a lot of really good material on research methods and research design, and this is an outline of his work on quantitative, qualitative, and mixed methodology. And we're going to not really talk much about mixed methods, and in fact I, like most other faculty, if not all faculty at Walden and elsewhere, would recommend that you not use a mixed methods approach in your doctoral study. I would recommend that in a dissertation, a master's thesis, any graduate work. I would recommend not using mixed methods because it more than doubles your work. Not only are you engaging in both quantitative and qualitative methods, you must synthesize the findings and integrate those findings together. So it more than doubles your work, and I really would strongly recommend that you not consider a mixed methods approach. So let's talk about Creswell's model. This is from his 2008 book. He's had newer editions, but the material remains mostly the same. So, problem statements. And you know problem statements, those of you in 8101 and 9101, you've already begun developing or have developed your problem statement. So research problem is an issue or concern that an investigator presents and justifies in a research study. Justify here means to support with evidence, and that evidence is gained from both observation and from the research literature. And we'll talk about that more as we continue in this discussion here. So one thing to keep in mind is that problem is a word that has a negative connotation. If I say I have a problem, it is typically meant as some kind of challenge, something not good, not positive, right? A problem is not a positive thing. But I'd like for you to think about problem in a slightly different way, that it may be an opportunity. So it might not be something that an organization is facing like a crisis, which I've done a lot of research on. It might actually be an opportunity to integrate new technology into the business in order to make the organization more efficient or more productive, or both. Okay, so when we say problem statement, we're not strictly adhering to the connotation that it is a negative thing. It may be a positive thing. Problem statements, according to Creswell, 2008. In applied social science research, problems arise from issues, difficulties, and current practices. Most of the students that I've ever worked with in graduate school, your problem statements come from something that you've experienced at work. You didn't get the job that you wanted, you didn't get the promotion, and you know that you were more qualified, but because you are a minority in a minority group, or you're a woman, you didn't get the promotion, and you believe that it was because you were a woman. And now you want to study the glass ceiling or some related issue of women in organizations, and I don't blame you. Or maybe you were part of a team that had a task, and the team just functioned really poorly, and you want to look at team dynamics and how can we improve team dynamics and team processes so that teams can be more effective and efficient. So most of the students that I've worked with have found their problem statements at work in their own professional lives. For example, schools may not have implemented multicultural guidelines. Minority students need better access to universities. A community needs to better understand the contributions of its early female pioneers. These are examples given by Creswell, and they are significant, and they merit further study and establish a practical problem that needs to be addressed. So keep that in mind as you're developing your own problem statement. It should be significant. It should merit further study, and it should be a problem, a practical one, that needs to be researched. A problem statement identifies the issues in which you are interested. Some suggestions. Be succinct. In other words, be to the point. There are guidelines given by Walden in the prospectus and doctoral study template and the doctoral study handbook, and you should treat those documents as sacred. Follow them to the letter, because you will be held to the language and the expectations that are outlined within the doctoral study handbook. So if it says that the problem statement must be one sentence and no more than 150 words or whatever it might say, be sure and follow those rules. But talking about Creswell's model, be succinct, be to the point, and don't fill the problem statement with a lot of wording. It doesn't need to be wordy. Get to the point quickly. Use a narrative hook. We're using an analogy here, a hook. When you go fishing, I don't fish. I don't like to fish. I've never seen the point. I'm staring at the water, but then people tell me that I just don't know. I've never really been fishing, and so perhaps I've never really been fishing, but I think it's not on my bucket list, let me put it that way. But I understand that some people like to fish, and that's fine. But we all understand the idea of fishing, and we understand the idea of a hook. And a hook gets into, you put some bait on the hook, the fish then hopefully will bite the bait, and the hook gets stuck in the fish's mouth, and you reel the fish in, and you have the fish for dinner. Well, that's what we're doing with the audience, although we're not going to have them for dinner, but we're going to try to hook them. We're going to get their attention narratively. So get that narrative hook. Rely on your passion. I can't tell you how important this is. What is it that is going to get you to get up at 5:30 or 6 o'clock in the morning on Saturday, your only day that you can sleep in, instead of hitting snooze? What are you passionate about that you're going to miss that event that your child is performing in, or going on boys' night out or girls' night out, or that vacation that you wanted to take, or whatever it might be, your favorite TV show that's on and you want to watch it. Thank goodness we've got DVRs and all of that these days, but you understand what I'm saying. What is it about your study that you're passionate about? You have to be passionate about your topic. You have to be passionate about what you're studying. I'm passionate about image management, how organizations create images how they brand themselves, and how that brand can suffer if the organization experiences a crisis. Right now I am doing research on SeaWorld. You may know that, and I'm recording this in May of 2017, and the Blackfish documentary, which came out a few years ago, created a crisis for SeaWorld, and SeaWorld has attempted to respond. Their efforts have been less than ideal, let's say, and ultimately the Shamu show, the killer whale, the orca whale show, has been canceled, and it has been ruled, at least in the state of California, that there can be no more orcas or killer whales born in captivity. So they're experiencing a crisis, and to me that's something that I'm passionate about. I'm passionate about studying that. I'm passionate enough to where I'm going to stay up late even when I'm sleepy. I'm going to get up in the morning whenever I don't want to. What is it about your study? What topic are you passionate about? Don't just pick something just because it's like, well, this seems like a good idea. You've got to, if you expect to finish this, and I know that you do, you've got to find something that you're passionate about. Locate your problem within the literature. So you've got a problem that you've identified. So for me, let's take Blackfish and the SeaWorld crisis as an example. I'm looking at the literature in crisis response, because the crisis response by SeaWorld hasn't been ideal. It hasn't been as good as it should have been. They were first, and for a long time, on the defensive. They said that they hadn't done anything wrong, that they were a good organization, that they did good things for the marine wildlife that they had in captivity, and that fell on deaf ears. And if you followed it at all, you know that they have had a variety of missteps in terms of their public relations efforts, and I'm therefore looking at the way that they have responded to the crisis, and I will be presenting this paper at a conference in June of 2017, and then hopefully thereafter publishing it. So you've got to locate your problem within the literature. Consider the audience. Your audience is, for the purposes of your doctoral study, academics like me, educated people, people who already have the degrees that you are seeking, a doctoral degree. They are educated, but they may not know about your specific topic. They may not be expert at Six Sigma. Let's say you're doing something on Six Sigma. I'm not expert on Six Sigma, personally. So think about your audience. And one of the things that we're going to see as a tip later is assume that your audience doesn't know anything about your topic. Sure, I know what leadership is, and I know the basic concepts of teamwork and Six Sigma ideas, but I'm not expert at it. So treat the audience that way. Your audience is educated, but maybe not informed, not as informed as you are about the topic. So, of course, don't dumb it down, as the colloquial expression goes, but write it in a way that can be understood by an educated audience. According to Creswell, there are 8 points to keep in mind when developing your problem statements. Write an opening sentence that stimulates interest as well as conveying an issue to which a broad readership can relate. That's a mouthful. Write an opening sentence that stimulates interest as well as conveys an issue to which a broad readership can relate. So get attention. An attention getter is one of the first things that you've got to do. That narrative hook that we talked about. You've got to get the reader's attention and interest. Why do I want to read this? Don't just assume that because you're passionate about something that other people are going to be passionate about it. So get them to be passionate about it. Specify the problem leading to the study. Be specific about your problem statement. Indicate why the problem is important. Focus the problem statement on the key concept being tested quantitatively or explored qualitatively. So my problem statement would be something about the crisis response at SeaWorld to the Blackfish documentary, and that it has been ineffective, which has caused SeaWorld to lose market share and has caused a restructuring of the organization to take place. So crisis response, you see, is in there. That's a key concept of the study that I'm doing. As a general rule, refrain from using quotes in the lead sentence. This kind of comes out of the blue from Creswell, but it's generally true. And in the opening sentence, we tend not to quote. And speaking of quotation, quotations are good. Okay, and quotations can be used very effectively in your writing, but use them judiciously. In other words, use them in a limited fashion. People don't want to read a bunch of quotes. Remember your audience. Your audience, we don't want to read a bunch of quotes. We want to read your words. Use quotes when your words cannot capture what was being said. Okay? So, not only should you refrain from using quotes in the lead sentence, you should limit the use of quotations in your document. Stay away from idiomatic expressions or trite phrases. Idiomatic expressions are colloquial expressions that an audience in America might get, but an audience in the UK might not. You might know that in the UK they say mind the gap, and they call an elevator a lift. And when you're getting on the lift, you should mind the gap, which is the gap that's in between the floor that you're standing on and the floor of the elevator. Well, those are idiomatic expressions, and they are particular to particular and specific audiences, and you want to avoid those. Trite phrases means an expression that ultimately has no meaning, so you obviously want to avoid that. Consider numeric information for impact. You know, I mentioned earlier about women in organizations, and I've done research on women in organizations and the glass ceiling, and it's still true that women, I believe that currently women earn 73 cents on the dollar compared to men. So a man for the same job makes $1, the woman makes 73 cents. That's a statistic that gets people. If you say that the system is unfair because women aren't paid as much as men, that makes your point. If you say women earn 73 cents to the dollar that a man makes, well, that really has a little bit more impact, doesn't it? It does for me. Consider short sentences for impact. What this means is vary the length of your sentences. Write some long sentences, insert some short sentences in there. And by the way, on the length of sentences, I've seen sentences that extended for almost an entire double-spaced page. Believe me, I have. And I hope that you haven't written any of those. My rule of thumb is that a sentence should be between 8 and 10 words. Try to keep your sentences to 8 to 10 words. Sometimes they need to be a little bit longer, and sometimes they can be shorter, but 8 to 10 words is a pretty good average. Distinguishing the research problem from other research steps. So we're going to talk for a few minutes here from Creswell about the research problem, topic, the purpose statement, and the research question. So a research problem is, as we've been talking about, an issue or problem in the study. A research topic is the broad subject matter being addressed in a study. The purpose, or purpose statement as we call it, is the major intent or objective of the study. Research questions are questions the researcher would like answered or addressed in the study. Differences among the topic, problem, purpose, and questions. They move, as you see here, from general to specific. So the topic, it might be distance learning. The research problem is a lack of students in distance learning classes. The purpose statement is to study why students do not attend distance education classes at a community college. And the research question is, does the use of website technology in the classroom deter students from enrolling in a distance education class? This is taken from Creswell. It's a good idea, right? It follows logically, and it goes from general distance learning to specific in the research question of asking the question of why students aren't enrolling in distance learning classes. Questions regarding contribution to knowledge and practice. So you've probably all been made aware of and learned the idea of filling a gap in the literature. Okay? So that's a job that you have in your doctoral study, is to identify a gap and fill it. Now, realize though that we're not expecting you to change the world in your doctoral study. And I know that I myself, when I was working on my PhD dissertation, I had that problem, and I had to be reined in a little bit by my chair and committee because I wanted to change the world. I don't know exactly how. I did a study on crisis management in the airline industry, and there were quite a few times where I wanted to do more and wanted to accomplish more and contribute more and fill a bigger gap and all of that than was necessary. You're not being asked to change the world. We're asking you to fill a gap, and that can be a small gap. I'm not saying it can be insignificant. It must be significant and must have some real world impact, but it doesn't have to change the world. You've got to fill a void or contribute to existing research. Does the study replicate an existing study with new participants or new sites? Replication, that's what replication is. To repeat a study exactly the same as it was done by other researchers, but with different participants or at a different location, a different business. And I don't know, I've never seen anyone do a replication in a doctoral study. I don't know if it's allowed or not. But again, we're talking generally here about Creswell and not about the doctoral study. But I don't know that a replication would be a study that would be approved for the Walden DBA doctoral study. Does the study address a new problem, or has this problem been understudied? So one piece of advice that I have, and I was talking to one of your classmates about this just the other day, and that is you remember the story of Goldilocks and the Three Bears, right? And it's one bowl of porridge was too cold, one was too hot, and one was just right. Okay, so you're looking for a problem statement that is just right. Too cold means that it's been done way too much. and say transformational leadership, for example. I would advise students, unless they really found they were very creative and they found something fresh, I would advise students not to study transformational leadership unless you pair it with some other variable that adds to the body of literature, because transformational leadership, just go to your favorite database, ProQuest or whatever it is, and just type in transformational leadership and look at the tens of thousands of hits that you get. And you'll see that it's been done, as you probably already know, and overdone. And that is porridge that's too cold. Porridge that's too hot is, let's say, virtual reality in the workplace. It's going to happen, but it's not happening yet. It might be happening at Sony, it might be happening in Silicon Valley a little bit, but it's not happening at GM that I know of. It's not happening at Procter & Gamble, but it will be in the next 10, 15 years. But because it's not really happening much, there's not any literature, or if there is any literature, there's not much literature on virtual reality in the workplace as of May 2017. Okay. Also, another topic might be autonomous vehicles, self-driving cars. Well, that's not a business problem necessarily. It could be a business problem, but let's just take it as an example. There's not yet a lot of research on self-driving cars, partly because there aren't a lot of self-driving cars. But we've seen some issues with the Tesla and other. Google has a self-driving car, and there are a couple of other companies that are working on self-driving cars, and we've had, I believe, a fatality or two. We've had accidents because of self-driving cars. So there would be some research out there, but it would be really, what I would say, porridge that's maybe a bit too hot. Just right would be research that is really fresh. I was telling that same student that presenteeism would be a really interesting topic, because the student suggested absenteeism. Well, absenteeism is porridge that's too cold. Absenteeism has been studied for 100 years, and maybe, we've studied it a little bit too much. And what about presenteeism? Presenteeism is an interesting idea. It's the idea of coming to work whenever you're sick, or coming to work whenever your mind is elsewhere. Your child is sick and your mind is not on your work. Working too much. Should people work 80 hours a week? Because we aren't productive. The research demonstrates that we are only maximally productive 3 or 4 hours a day. So why would we be working 10 to 12 hours a day, 6 or 7 days a week? So presenteeism is being present but being absent at the same time. Now that is porridge that's just right. There's enough literature out there to locate the problem within the research literature, but it hasn't been overdone. Does the study give voice to people not heard, silenced, or rejected in society? This is kind of a critical theory kind of perspective, but giving voice to minorities, to women, to whatever group it might be that has no voice, is one way that Creswell says a problem could be developed. Does the study inform practice? In the case of your doctoral studies, the answer must be yes, because this is a doctoral study, and a DBA is about practical application. It's not a PhD dissertation. So the answer to that question for you has to be yes. It has to inform practice. Okay, are you going to use quantitative or qualitative? You use quantitative if your research problem requires you to measure variables, assess the impact of those variables on an outcome, test theories or broad explanations, and apply results to a large number of people. We use qualitative if our research problem requires us to learn about the views of the people that we plan to study, assess a process over time, generate theories based on participant perspectives, obtain detailed information about a few people or research sites. So I'm wanting to focus less on the quantitative and qualitative methodologies and talk about this generally, but if you want to think more about quantitative and qualitative and which one to use, go to Creswell. But one piece of advice that I'll give you about quantitative and qualitative in general is that oftentimes graduate students, I believe, are mistaken in their belief that qualitative methodology is easier because we don't have to know SPSS, we don't have to deal with the numbers, and that's hard work, okay? And yes, it is. But it's also easy work, and here's why. What are your data in a quantitative study? The statistical results of your tests, okay? Numbers. What are the data in a qualitative study? Your narrative, the story that you're telling, and the interviews of people that you asked and your interpretation of those interviews. Now, which of those is easier to write? Which is easier to convince an audience the validity of? If you're thinking quantitative, you're right. It's easier to, as I was saying earlier, if I say that women are treated unfairly in the workplace, that's one thing, and I can make a narrative argument about that. But if I say that women make 73 cents on the dollar that men make, that's fairly convincing, right? So think hard about whether you're going to use quantitative or qualitative research, and follow Creswell's mantra. What he says is that the research methods that we use should not be determined by time or money or our own proclivity, our own abilities. The only criterion we should use when determining which method to select is the problem statement itself. So let the problem statement be your guide on determining which method to use. The flow of ideas in a problem statement. We've got a topic, and that's a subject area. We've got a problem or issue, which is a concern, a problem, something that needs a solution. We have evidence for the issue, evidence from the literature as well as practical experience, deficiencies in the evidence, the gap in the literature. In this body of evidence, what is missing? What do we need to know more about? And finally, what remedying the deficiencies will do for select audiences. How will addressing what we need to know help researchers, educators, policymakers, or individuals like those in the study? The literature review. It documents the importance of the research problem at the beginning of the study. It supports the theory or explanation used in the study, and it foreshadows or forecasts the research questions and provides an explanation for the results in other studies and in the theoretical prediction at the end of the study. So the literature review is a huge part of your doctoral study. It is fundamentally the bulk of section 1 of your doctoral study. Okay? So it's a big chunk of it. So I know that in 8101 and 91 or 9001, you're required to select at the beginning of the semester or the term a few of those issues: problem statement, purpose statement, literature review, theoretical or conceptual model, etc. I would say that starting with the literature review would be one of the first things that you need to really dive into, because you need to locate your problem within the literature, as we saw earlier. Designing and conducting a literature review: we identify key terms, we locate the literature, we read and evaluate the relevance of the literature to our own topic, and after the selection, we organize the literature into a coherent picture of studies and documents on our topic. We write a review by developing summaries of the literature and synthesizing them. Synthesis is incredibly important, and I distinguish here between synthesizing the literature and listing it. Do not list. Synthesis means combining two or more things into something new. Specifically related to a literature review, synthesis means putting information together in a new way by demonstrating the connections between different literatures, between different research articles, book chapters, books, etc. One mistake I see beginning research writers make is to review Article 1. This is the listing approach that I mentioned. You review Article 1, stop. Review Article 2, stop. Review Article 3, stop, and so on. This produces a disjointed and non-synthesized review of literature. It creates a listing. So rather than the listing approach to writing a review, combine and review the literature concurrently. Concurrently meaning at the same time, demonstrating the connections between the articles and authors. So don't let yourself do that. Don't go to Article 1. Okay, I've reviewed it. Article 2, reviewed. Article 3, reviewed. That's not a literature review. I'm going to provide a link to some Walden websites that are going to be very valuable to you along with this announcement. So please go to those. One is about literature reviews and synthesis, and another is about scholarly writing and how to write in the academic voice. Purpose statements, research questions, research hypotheses, research objectives. The purpose statement is a declarative statement that advances the overall direction or focus for the study. Research questions are interrogative statements that narrow the purpose statement to specific questions that researchers seek to answer in their study. And this may seem like a given, but I've seen people make a mistake on this, so I'll say it explicitly. Research questions must end with a question mark, as opposed to hypotheses, which must end with a period. Interrogative means question asking. Declarative means statement making. Okay? So research questions must end with a question mark. They are questions. The research hypotheses are declarative statements in quantitative research. Only quantitative research, as you know. Qualitative methods do not have or test hypotheses. Declarative statements in quantitative research in which the investigator or investigators makes a prediction or conjecture about the relationship between or among variables. Research objective is a statement of intent for the study that specifies specific goals that the investigator plans to achieve. We don't, in the doctoral study, really include the research objective so much, but I'm including it here as a general discussion of Creswell. So, distinguishing among these various forms of direction and research. The purpose statement The intent is to provide the overall direction. The form is one or more sentences. Its use is in quantitative and qualitative research. Its placement is at the end of the introduction. Research questions raise questions to be answered. The form is one or more questions, statements that end in a question mark. Quantitative and qualitative research use research questions, and their placement is at the end of the introduction, after the literature review, or in a separate section of the study. A hypothesis or hypotheses make predictions about expectations. Their form is one or more declarative statements. Their use is in quantitative research only, not in qualitative. Location, again, end of the introduction, after the literature review, or in a special section of the study. The research objectives state the goals. The form, one or more objectives. The use in quantitative or qualitative research. Some writing tips. Avoid self-reference. APA 6.0 does allow for limited, and I want to put emphasis on that word limited. APA 6.0 allows for the limited use of first-person pronouns, largely to avoid awkward language and anthropomorphism. Anthropomorphism is a big word. It simply means giving non-living things living characteristics. An example is to write let's say this paper will analyze a 6-step model of decision making. So this paper will analyze, or this paper analyzes. A paper doesn't analyze. A paper cannot analyze because a paper is not a living thing. That is an example of anthropomorphism. You are giving living characteristics to a non-living thing. A paper, a document, a doctoral study does not live and cannot do living things. If I say that this rock in my hand is going to hit you, well, no, I will have to be the one to hit you with the rock, which I wouldn't do because I'm a nice guy. But just as an example that came off the top of my head, a rock is a non-living thing. A rock doesn't do anything and cannot do anything. Alright, so APA 6.0 allows for limited use of first-person pronouns. I is first person. You see some examples of second and third person there as well. But it's the self-reference largely that I'm talking about here, and that Creswell's talking about, that we want to avoid. Also, this idea of using this author, this is one of my own pet peeves. I just don't like seeing that anyone or hearing anyone refer to themselves in the third person. Just use first person. Rather than saying that this paper will analyze the 6 steps of decision making, just simply write, in this paper I will examine the 6 steps of decision making. Okay? And not, in this paper this author will examine. Don't do that either. Avoid colloquial expressions. These are things, like I mentioned earlier, that are understood in one part of the world and not understood in another, and as well, they are not scholarly writing. They're not. They're too informal. Okay. Another thing we want to do is we want to maintain an objective voice. And I mentioned to you that I'm going to provide a link to a really good website from Walden on scholarly writing, and you should definitely take a look at that, and do more than just take a look at it. Study it. It has a lot of useful information, and learn about the scholarly voice, because it's important. Very, very important. I would say that writing and the presentation of your document is so important that, and listen carefully, that excellent ideas written poorly don't stand as good a chance of publication as mediocre ideas written excellently. Something written well, even if it's not that fresh, maybe if it's not the just right, maybe if it's a bit overdone, but it's written well, it has a better chance of publication, or in your case, being approved as a doctoral study, is a better chance than really, really good ideas but written poorly. So write correctly and write for your audience, write objectively, write in the scholarly voice, follow APA style, use transitions, internal summaries, and previews, assume the reader knows little or nothing about your topic, and finally, have fun. Again, this has to be something that you want to do. I'm proud of you. I'm proud of all of my students for taking this huge, monumental effort on yourselves, and I want all of you to succeed. And if it is painful for you to work on this project, then you're not having fun, and if you're not having fun, the chances of you succeeding at this are diminished. I think you would agree with that. So have fun with it. The reference there from Creswell. Thank you for your time, and I hope that this has been a helpful discussion so that you understand this model better. I wish that I had had Creswell's book when I was writing my own master's thesis and my own dissertation. I joke sometimes that my committee hid the book from me and from other graduate students at the University of Arizona, where I earned my PhD. I don't know. I hope they weren't that mean, but his book was around, his ideas were around, but I never saw it. And I wish I had, because it really does provide you with a really good model of how to conduct research, qualitative, quantitative, and mixed methods, which you should never do. Thank you again for your time, and again, I hope this has been a valuable tool for you in your own pursuit of your DBA.